If you're looking into getting a compact box speaker either for your man cave or for entertaining with, then chances are the Sony XP500 and JBL Partybox 110 are the first options that come to mind. Now, even though the Sony XP500 is decent in its own right, performance-wise, the JBL Partybox 110 simply blows the XP500 right out of the water. But if you're still trying to choose between either of these two speakers, then keep watching. Now regarding pricing, both of these speakers retail for $350. Now, like I said, performance-wise, the 110 simply outclasses the XP500 sound quality-wise, especially when running off of its internal battery. Whereas with the XP500, this is a speaker that if you want to get the most out of it, you gotta use it while it's plugged in. Nonetheless, if you want to pick either of these two speakers up, they'll be linked down below. Now first, let's talk about the design of these speakers. Now both of these speakers have mostly plastic bodies and a metal grille on the front. So if you plan on taking either of these speakers on the go with you, they can be scratch magnets. But regarding durability, both of these speakers are water resistant because you can seal off the ports on the back. So if either of these two speakers were to get caught in a little bit of rain, they should be just fine, just as long as their ports are sealed off. And when it comes to portability, both of these speakers are a little over 2 feet tall. The Partybox weighs in at 23 pounds, whereas the XP500 weighs in at just a little under 25 pounds. And they both have built-in carrying handles. So carrying these speakers around isn't too bad. However, one major physical difference between these two speakers is that the Partybox has a speaker mount on the bottom if you need it, whereas the XP500 just doesn't. But then there's the light feature on these speakers. Now, either at night or indoors, the light feature on the XP500 looks good. And I've also noticed that it has a neat backsplashing effect. However, plainly said, the light feature on the Partybox just looks way better. It's more vibrant, dynamic, and you've got a lot more control over it through JBL's Partybox app. Now, you definitely shouldn't be making a speaker decision just on a light feature, but I mean, just look at it. But now let's talk about battery life on these speakers. The Sony XP500 has an advertised battery life of 20 hours, whereas the Partybox 110 has an advertised battery life of 12 hours. However, the XP500's advertised battery life of 20 hours is with it playing at 30% volume, with its light feature turned off, but with Mega Bass turned on, which is good. However, 30% volume on this speaker is nothing. It's good for like ambiance, but it's not good for actually listening to music. Whereas with the Partybox, its advertised battery life is with it playing at around 20% volume, with its light feature turned off, and with bass boost turned off as well. However, 20% volume on the Partybox is noticeably louder than 30% volume on the Sony. And in general, the Sony is very quiet for its size when running off of its internal battery. And personally, I feel that most people will be using the Sony between 75 to 100% volume on a regular basis, whereas with the Partybox, 60 to 80% volume is a really good listening volume. So real-world use with the XP500 playing at 80% volume with the light feature turned on and with Mega Bass turned on, it's good for about 8 hours of playback time, which is fine. Whereas with the Partybox playing at 65% volume, which is just as loud as the XP500 playing at 80% volume, with the light feature turned on and with bass boost set to level 1, it's also good for about 8 hours of playback time. So, even though at first glance the Sony XP500 has a much longer advertised battery life than the JBL Partybox 110, since I feel most people are going to have to use the Sony at a much higher volume than what they would with the Partybox 110, that's going to cause their battery life to drain much faster. However, just keep in mind, battery life on these speakers really varies depending on how you use them. If you've got them set at a higher volume, that's going to drain your battery life. If you use their light features, that's going to drain your battery life. And if you use their bass features, that's going to drain your battery life as well, especially with the Partybox, since you've got 3 different levels of bass to choose from. But now let's talk about the ports on these speakers. Both of these speakers have a pair of 1/4-inch inputs, so if you want, you can plug in a pair of microphones, which could be a big deal for someone who might want to do karaoke. However, with the Partybox, you can also adjust the bass, the treble, and the echo if you wanted to. Now, personally, I really wouldn't mess around with these settings, but they're there. Next up are the USB-A ports on these speakers. The Sony has two, whereas the Partybox only has one. Nonetheless, you can use these USB-A ports to either charge your own devices, or you can also play music off of a USB stick. Now, personally, I think it's great and all that both of these speakers have USB-A ports, but like I've said in the past, I wish these speakers also had USB-C ports so that you can either charge your own devices or use it as a wired connection, because most new phones these days now come included with USB-C cables instead. Next up, both of these speakers have your standard 3.5mm audio jack, so you can always use a wired connection with either of these speakers. However, with the Partybox, you also have an audio out jack. So if you've got a spare speaker lying around, regardless of size or brand, you can always daisy chain it to the Partybox and get them to play in sync. And when it comes to wireless connectivity, both of these speakers are using Bluetooth 5.1, but the important thing here is that both of these speakers can be connected to two devices at the same time, so you and a friend can both be DJ. Both of these speakers have zero latency across the board when watching movies or videos on your phone, whether you're using an iPhone or an Android device. And when it comes to audio codecs, the Partybox only has support for SBC and AAC, which is perfectly fine. But with the Sony, you've got support for SBC, AAC, and Sony's own LDAC, which really only matters if you're an Android user. But now let's talk about actually listening to music with these speakers. Both of these speakers have a pair of frontward firing woofers, and they both have a pair of frontward firing tweeters. And with either of these two speakers, whether you've got them laying down flat or standing upright, you've got your left channel and your right channel. These speakers don't turn into a mono speaker if you've got them standing upright. Now, regarding mega bass and bass boost with the XP500, if you're going to be listening to music, you want to have a mega bass turned on, because if not, the speaker sounds very flat. Whereas with the Partybox 110, even with this bass boost feature turned off, it still sounds pretty good. However, the bass boost has two levels to it. Now, personally, I think bass boost level 1 sounds best, but if you want more bass, you can always crank it up to bass boost level 2. But finally, with both of these speakers, if you were to use them while they're plugged in, you are going to get a performance boost out of them. However, the performance boost that you get out of the XP500 is way more drastic than the performance boost that you get out of the Partybox 110. Now, I'll dive a little deeper into max volume in a minute, but for now, let's just jump into the sound test. Both of these speakers are playing while unplugged, but the XP500 is playing at 90% volume with a mega bass turned on, whereas the Partybox is playing at 70% volume with bass boost set to level 1.
Bittersweet and I'm walking slow. Sensitive, feel the afterglow. Looking for things that I can't control. Fear from my past, cause it always shows. You I wanna try, can I let it go? Running from the past, wanting to be sure. Chaos in my mind, constant deja vu. But every time it comes back to you. Whoa, I'm still falling. Whoa, but it tastes bittersweet. Whoa, I keep on falling. Whoa, I like the taste of it. it tastes bittersweet. Oh, I keep on falling. Oh, I like the taste of it. Oh, I'm still falling. Oh, but it tastes bittersweet. Oh, I keep on falling. Oh, I like the taste of it.
So sound quality wise, I feel that both of these speakers have the same instrument separation. However, when it comes to sound signatures, the Partybox does put a little more emphasis on the mids, which brings the vocals out, whereas with the XP500, it does sound a little warmer. But with the XP500, if you wanted to, you can always go into Sony's app and bring out the mids a little bit, whereas with the Partybox, JBL still doesn't allow you to directly adjust its EQ. Nonetheless, I think the Partybox sounds great just the way it is, whereas with the XP500, I can never get it to sound like the Partybox, no matter how much I play around with its EQ. But for my bass heads that are watching, I do gotta say that the Partybox can have more bass than the XP500 if you've got it set to bass boost level 2. Now, personally, I don't like bass boost level 2 because I feel that it's too much, but if you're a bass head, maybe that's what you're looking for. But now we really need to adjust max volume on these speakers. The Partybox 110 gets decently loud for its size while running off of its internal battery. If you're trying to jam out, 80% volume is more than enough. Whereas with the XP500, this speaker is very quiet for its size when running off of its internal battery. Even if you've got the speaker cranked all the way up at max volume, it's going to leave you wanting more. But if you use the XP500 while it's plugged in, that's when the speaker finally wakes up and it starts to perform like what you'd expect. Now, you're also going to get a performance bump out of the 110 if you use it while it's plugged in, but the performance difference on the 110 when it's plugged in versus unplugged isn't as dramatic as the XP500. So overall, both of these speakers sound good, but the 110 is simply the better option here. Personally, I like its slightly brighter sound signature, but more importantly, this speaker gets decently loud when running off of its internal battery, and if you want, it also has more bass than the XP500. But now let's talk about pairing these speakers up with other speakers. The XP500 is using Sony's Party Connect, meaning that you can pair it up to other Sony Party Connect speakers, like either another XP500 or an XP700. And if you want, you can even pair it up to Sony's smaller, more portable speakers, like either an XG500, XP43, XP33, or even an XP23. And if you want, you can even pair up to 100 speakers together, which is obviously overkill. Whereas with the Partybox 110, you can only pair it up to either one other Partybox 110 or to a Partybox 310. And unfortunately, you can't wirelessly pair a Partybox to any of JBL's Party Boost speakers. So if you've got a JBL Boombox 2, Extreme 3, Charge 5, Flip 5, or JBL Pulse 4, they won't sync up to the Partybox. Now, I think it's awesome that you can pair a lot more speakers with the Sony XP500, but personally, Sony's Party Connect is not my favorite speaker pairing protocol. It's not as easy to use. Sometimes not all of your speakers will get synced up, and sometimes you will hear skipping. Whereas with JBL's TWS, which is found on the Partybox, it just works. So with all that being said, the Sony XP500 is a decent little box speaker. It sounds good, and I really like that you can pair it up with Sony's other Party Connect speakers, making it very versatile. But performance-wise, it's very hard for me to recommend the XP500 over the Partybox 110. From a sound quality standpoint, I think the 110 sounds better and it gets louder when running off of its internal battery. But also, the 110 does bring extra goodies. For starters, just look at that light feature. But also, the 110 has that audio out jack, which can come in handy, and it also has that speaker mount if you need it. Overall, you really can't go wrong with the Partybox 110. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. If you want to pick another products up mentioned in this video, those will be linked in the description down below, and you can also support the channel by checking out the merch store. But other than that, I'll catch you next time.